I worked at the BBC for a long time.
In your opinion, do you think that students and young writers should be paying more attention to culture in their work?
I think anyone who's writing and is serious about writing needs to read.
If you could give your 20-year-old self one sentence of career advice, what would that be?
Doubt is a really good but underrated quality in writers and journalists and anyone creative. Doubt. It sounds counterintuitive.
Welcome back to EssayPro. Today, we are talking about reporting the arts, why culture still matters. And today, we are met with our lovely guest, Stephen Smith. Can you go ahead and tell everyone what you do for a living?
Yes, I'm not sure I've been called lovely too often, Kennedy, so that's very nice of you. Well, I've been a journalist all my working life, and in the last 20 plus years or so, which is an incredibly long time in journalism now these days, I've been covering a lot of stuff, but including arts, culture. So everything from music to theatre, books, plays, movies. I've been lucky enough to meet some of the great cultural figures of our time and time just gone. Yeah, so that's what I've been doing, as well as quite a lot of political stuff as well in the UK. But yes, I think I'm mainly here to talk to you and your audience about reporting on culture. And I just to give you a bit more detail to flesh that out. So mostly I've worked in television news for Channel 4 News, which is one of the big networks here, and also the BBC, which I assume doesn't need much introduction.
No, sir.
I worked on one of their flagship news and current affairs programs covering culture. And I was also lucky enough to make some extended documentaries about stories in the arts.
Seems like you got a wide array of experience under your belt. I mean, you've covered everything from like fine arts to punk gigs. What kind of first drew you into the world of cultural journalism?
Well, I think it was kind of meeting my heroes, becoming a journalist. They say it's very dangerous to meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you. But, it's one thing if you're somebody in the street trying to meet, say, your favorite musician. It's another thing if you have the badge of the BBC behind you. And I suppose there was an element of proselytizing, of wanting to share my interests with an audience. I mean, just for instance, I'm quite into jazz music. And so it was great to introduce audiences that I've presented to with some great jazz musicians, people like Herbie Hancock. I met Herbie Hancock, who is has had a stellar career going right back to the days of Miles Davis, but then he's made lots of dance music. And it was great to meet him. He studied at college, he studied music and engineering. And I said to him, he was in the UK, so he was talking about how much he loved England. And he said he had a Jaguar car, which in those days were made in England. And so he has this background in music and engineering. And I said to him, Herbie, when you're in your Jaguar, what do you listen to? And he said, the engine, man. I just thought that was So, I mean, it started really, I suppose, as a bit of a fanboy wanting to meet some of my heroes and to share my enthusiasm for them with a wider audience.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like a good way to get into it, just for the love of your heroes. That's pretty good. When you first started out, Yeah, yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think
What were you saying?
enthusiasm will get you a long way, you know,
Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
and persistence. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Persistence and the love of the game.
that's right.
Okay. Yeah. When you were first starting out, did you see yourself as an arts journalist, or did that identity kind of grow over time with the web?
No, I didn't. I didn't at all. I mean, I think um, in the journalistic profession, um, certainly TV journalism, foreign correspondents rank quite highly, you know,
Hmm.
the guys on the scene. So, for instance, near where you are at the moment, there'll be a lot of frontline foreign correspondents reporting on the situation in LA.
Hmm.
And they were well, they are considered in some ways the acme of the profession, the most daring, the most glamorous. Um, I was very influenced by reading people like Graham Greene, a British writer. Don't know how many of
Hmm.
your audience will know him, but
I've
he
never heard of
produced a
him.
lot. Graham Greene, yeah, well, he was quite a noted English British novelist of the last century and started
Hmm.
as a journalist, but he was very much he wasn't the kind of writer who stays in his study. He got out and he went to places like Haiti, Liberia, in Africa. He wrote a great book called Our Man in Havana, which kind of anticipated the Castro revolution in Cuba. So
Hmm.
I think I wanted to be him. I wanted to go to these slightly dangerous places and report from the front line. And I did a bit of that. I went to places like Somalia. Some of you might have seen that film Black Hawk Down about
Hmm.
um, the American involvement in Mogadishu. Uh, I went to places like Bosnia, which was in the middle of a civil war in Central Europe. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I did a bit of frontline stuff. Um, but I guess it wasn't really for me, and slowly migrated towards a different kind of journalism.
Yeah, I can imagine it's very dangerous being out there. Is that kind of like what you noticed, where you were like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore?
I think it
Like the
was a bit like
danger.
that. you know uh, Sometimes, where I mean, sadly, journalists do get killed and injured in the line of duty, um,
Hmm.
and often what people will say is, his colleagues or her colleagues will say, well, you know what? He died doing what he wanted. And I thought, well, if that happens to me, I don't want anyone saying that because this isn't really what I want.
It's not what I
I,
want.
I have no, I have no regrets about doing it. But in the line of work, I got shot at a couple of times, and I thought, it gives me so much anxiety. It's probably,
Yeah,
I'm glad I've done it. I can say I've done it, but maybe I'll do something else.
that's
And
crazy. I mean, yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, if I was doing something like that, I'd probably poop my pants and quit on the spot. That's crazy. That's brave.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the people who do it and go back to it day after day, that really is brave. Um,
Hmm.
but they do take risks.
Exactly.
So I admire them,
All right.
and we need them. We need them reporting from Ukraine and the Middle East and places like that at the moment, don't we?
100%. Um, so we talked about some of the assignments you've done. What was your
Yeah.
most unexpectedly delightful or delightfully weird assignment? And in the yeah, that's the question.
Okay.
Like
Well, I'm
your
not
weirdest
sure how
experience.
delightful it was, but at least it's kind of American. So I was writing a book about Cuba. This was
Hmm.
a little while ago, while Fidel Castro was still alive, still running things, and I went to Guantanamo Bay posing as an arms dealer, if you will.
Nice.
So
Okay.
I was writing this book, and as you might know, a lot of Cubans weren't happy with life under Castro, and they fled across the Florida Straits. I'm not sure if Trump has renamed that yet. I think he probably hasn't. And they landed and settled in Florida. And a lot of them, while Castro was alive, they were planning to go back to stage some kind of insurgency and replace the government. So I was, as I say, I was writing this book. I went to the Everglades. I went on maneuvers with these kind of Cuban guys who wanted to go and take Havana by force. And while I was there, I just happened to be reading the local paper, which is always a great tip. Check out local news sources online or, papers, TV. And it said that in Guantanamo Bay, they were having a sale of arms equipment. They were getting rid of lots of trucks that had been used in Desert Storm in Iraq. This is before Guantanamo became synonymous with waterboarding, before
Yeah.
terrorist suspects were housed there. So anyway, I pitched up. I thought, this is never going to work. They're never going to believe that I'm an arms dealer, that I want to go and buy some weapons in Guantanamo Bay. But they didn't ask too many questions, and I flew over there. I remember it was December. So this is a strange anomaly, right? You've got Cuba, which to this day is a communist country. And at the eastern tip of it, you have this American base, fully staffed American base. And I remember getting there. It was, it was very hot, let's say. And accompanying us on our plane was this big shipment of Christmas trees so that the soldiers, the airmen and women would have a reminder of home at Christmas. So that was in the UK, we call that a blag. Can you get into somewhere where perhaps you shouldn't be? And it
A
was
blag.
delightfully weird. Yeah, a
Is
blag.
that like what is a blag? It's like a
Well,
that's a
let's
new one for
say
me. I never.
if you've ever got into a nightclub and got under the rope and got into the VIP area and had drinks with your favorite hip hop star, and perhaps you weren't really meant to be there and you weren't on the guest list,
Mm,
that would qualify as a blag. I don't know if that's happened to you. I
um,
imagine it might have done.
no,
No,
lots of times, especially in
there
college.
you
I
go.
I sneaked frat parties back in the day. I did a little blag
Sure.
over them.
Yeah. Well, that's what we call it here. So you're welcome to that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna steal that for sure. Thank you for that. Okay. Well, in the world of breaking news and hot takes, why do you think, in your opinion, that the arts still matter?
Well, I once had a bit of an argument with an editor of mine who said that art stories don't travel. In other words, they don't sort of gain momentum and circulate like, say, a big political story or the story that's going on near you at the moment. And I said, but that's complete nonsense. You've only got to attach a celebrity's name to a story, Beyonce or Taylor Swift, and it sort of travels like gangbusters. So I've never accepted that art stories can't be hot takes, can't be topical and newsy. Um, but not
Hmm.
everything is breaking news or a hot take. Fortunately, there is still some longer form journalism around, and maybe some of your audience practices this or hopes to. The essay is a long form of journalism. And we see places like the New Yorker, the Guardian still promoting and running longer pieces. The
Hmm.
arts contribute a lot to the economy. One of the reasons people come to London is to go to the theatre. Our theatres
Yeah,
in London are full of Americans and others who want to see a show.
I was just
Um,
there. It was great.
yeah, what
It
did
was
you see
amazing.
anything in particular?
Yeah, I saw The Master Builder with Ewan McGregor. It was
Oh
phenomenal.
yeah, I haven't
It was
seen
amazing.
that.
I had
Was
the
it
worst
good?
seat in the house. It was great. I had the worst seat, but I got a little bit of scotch and whiskey, and it was a great time.
Well, those theatres are incredibly old. A lot of them they were built in Victorian days, when people were
Yeah.
possibly slightly smaller, and they also put up with the fact that they didn't all have a perfect viewpoint. But so the arts
Hmm.
contribute to the economy, they provide lots of jobs. I think as well that the arts are like an alternative stream of news. If you want to know
Hmm.
what people were like in a society, in a country 50, 100, 200 years ago, you go to the art, you know. What were the
Hmm.
paintings like? What were they watching in the theater? What were they reading? You don't want to take down
Hmm.
some. I mean, the news focus is always about politicians, but actually their memoirs are dusty and dull and
Hmm.
self-aggrandizing. You know, if you really want to know about, you know, American history, you might want to read Fitzgerald or Faulkner or Mark Twain or some, you know, some of the
Hmm.
writers and artists that are coming up now. So I see it as a sort of alternative hot take. That's
Hmm.
not to say that all the arts are worth your time. Of course, there's a lot of crap around, you know, but the best
Yeah.
rises to
Yeah.
the top.
Exactly. The best has some longevity. There's a lot of crap
Yes,
art out there these days.
there is.
It's
There is.
disheartening. Yeah. Um, in your opinion, do you think that students and young writers should be paying more attention to culture in their work? Why or why not?
Well, I mean, I think anyone who's writing and is serious about writing needs to read, right?
Exactly. Hmm.
And I think, you know, read everything. My son is 13. He's just been reading a classic called The Lord of the Flies by William
I.
Golding. You know that
Hmm.
book?
I've heard of
It's,
it. I have never got the
yeah,
chance to read it though.
it's kind of like a, I mean, it was written long before reality TV, but it's kind of like that. This bunch of
Mm.
schoolboys, I think there's a plane crash and they end up on a desert island, and what happens to them. And actually, a lot of barbaric traits come out. And my son was struggling with this book, but you know, we encouraged him to read it. But he also reads Marvel comics, and I think, you know, if to talk about students, I think they should ingest and absorb as many different sources as possible because that will enrich their writing. But you
Yeah.
know, it's kind of a personal choice. If your students, if, I don't know how many are interested in a job in journalism, but the arts might be something they would consider. You know, they might
Yeah.
want to take that up. They might want to write about hip hop, or they might want to write about some of the amazing um, black artists who are emerging in the States. You know, there's been this great wave of interest in black figurative art, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think it's well worth them taking the time. And the more I've found this, you know, I'm a lot older than you and your students, I think, but the older I get, the more I read, the more it seems to improve my writing because you've just got more to draw on. And you know,
Yeah.
you know, you might be writing something and you might want to, there might be something in that play you saw with Ewan McGregor that you might want to drop in, and that will give your piece added spice and something a bit Tony, you know.
Yeah, you get more colors for your palette if you're out there
That's right,
experiencing the world.
exactly. Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Even if it's not
And you know,
conscious, you kind of absorb subconsciously.
and I think you mentioned hot takes and things. Everything is so instant, you know,
Hmm.
and everything tends to be lowest common denominator. What, how can I put my message in as few words as possible, or maybe just in, you know, emojis or something? But actually, people will stop and read something well written. We hope, you know, some
Mm.
of the time. Attention spans are supposedly getting shorter all the time. I heard that in the Louvre Museum in France now,
Right.
they reckon that the average length of time anyone spends in front of a painting is 7 seconds. which
Oh
is partly
man.
driven by the crowds, and people's feeling that they have to get around and see everything. But uh, we need to make time to stop and not just look at the latest TikTok video, I hope.
Mhm. Yeah, gotta keep that attention span longer, not shorter. I've been
Yeah.
there
Well,
before. It was overwhelming. A lot of stuff there at the
yeah.
Louvre.
You're well
Hmm.
traveled. You've seen a lot. Yeah.
That's the life I like. Is I gotta add some paints to my palette, man. Gotta
And do
keep
you
gotta keep it
write?
up.
Do you write? Do you? Because that's
I
something
s-
I
I
do. I mean,
screenwrite.
yeah.
Yeah,
And do you
I do
write
some
about your
screenwriting.
travels and places you've seen?
Um, I do a lot of journaling, but primarily just for like my own records of my life, just so I can make a book later on about that. But
Yeah.
creatively, I do screenwriting, but I like to take in my experiences and
Okay.
release them in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, on the in the vein of writing, your writing blends a lot of wit, critique, and insight. Do you plan your humor, or is it kind of just leak out naturally, like a leaky pipe or something?
Well, yeah, probably leaky pipe is what a lot of people would say. I mean, I worked at the BBC for a long time, and
Hmm.
I thought to myself, do I want to be, it's still a big organization, right? They've had some cuts. And I thought, do I want to be like the 500th best straight reporter, or do I want to do something different? And
Hmm.
I was on this late night news program. So it would start at 10:30 at night, uh, finish at 11:15. I'd usually be on near the end with my art stuff. And I just used to think, would I still be watching this if I was at home? What could I do to keep people's interest? Humor is such a powerful tool. That's why
Hmm.
advertisers use it. They spend millions of dollars. They know they've only got your eyeballs and your ears for a few seconds. So very often they use humor, wit to try and snag you, to make you like them and their product. Um, so it was kind of calculated, but it's also, you know, if you've got a choice between doing something straight or doing something that you can maybe put some laughs in, why not do
Hmm.
that? And
Yeah.
I made a rod for my own back, because in journalism, certainly in sort of straight news journalism in the UK, it's sometimes frowned on. But I would often get really good responses from audiences. Um,
Hmm.
and often the pieces that I did, just because they were different, would be maybe the most memorable in the program. So,
Hmm.
the other thing is, when I started out, I think it's all about influences with things like writing. And I used to read some great writers who were journalists, but managed to be sort of elegant and funny. Many of your students, I'm sure, will know Christopher Hitchens, who
Mm.
sadly died of cancer a few years ago. But he was a very prominent journalist in the States. There are tons of bits of him all over the internet. He was famous as an atheist. He was also quite controversial, having come from a fairly left wing background for backing things like the Iraq War. But he was a brilliant writer, very witty, stylish, and you know you find people that you like. You might never be as good as them, but you want to emulate them. Maybe when you're doing your screenplays, you have one or two
Yeah.
people in mind who you
I got a
think,
lot. I got a lot in
well,
mind.
there you go. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Would you say that Christopher Hitchens was the one who influenced your voice the most, or do you have other writers or journalists that kind of
Yeah, quite a
left their
few. I mean, I mention him partly because your audience might know him. I mean, there were some
Hmm.
great writers in the old days of the New Yorker. Even
Hmm.
I'm too young to remember them at the time, but I caught up with them. People like Dorothy Parker, a great writer called Sid Perlman, who wrote
Hmm.
for the New Yorker magazine and also wrote some scripts for the Marx Brothers. But some British ones. There's an Australian journalist called Clive James, who I think made some TV series that probably got seen in the States. They were certainly on the BBC. So these, reading these guys, and I'm afraid they were mostly men. I think when you
Mm.
look for role models, you perhaps tend to look for people who are vaguely like you or might be. Although I've since,
Yeah.
admire many female writers. Um, so those guys, I would read them and think, well, wouldn't it be great to write as well as that, and
Mm.
to achieve something of what they did? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah. I
also,
totally agree.
you talked about screenplays. I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of really first-rank directors like Spielberg, Peter Jackson, who did The Lord of the Rings, Steven
Mhm.
Soderbergh. Who else have I met? Martin Scorsese. I had this great time with
Uh,
Martin Scorsese. He was supposed to do an interview in London when Wolf of Wall Street came out, and he
mhm.
couldn't make it because his wife was ill, I think. And so he said, "Why don't you come to New York?" So this was in the
Yeah.
days when news media still had a bit of money. I found myself flying to New York to interview
Mm.
Scorsese at a favorite place of his. And he talked about how he was still scared to go out in parts of New York. For him, it was still like it was in the 70s, when he was making
Mhm.
Taxi Driver. It was still the mean streets. But
Yeah.
a great privilege to meet someone like that. And I think I'm always drawn to talent, in whatever form, like sports stars, people who can make, tailors in Savile Row, London, who can make a great suit, talent
Mhm.
like that, designers, chefs who can rustle up amazing food, things I
Yeah.
certainly
That's an
can't
art
do.
form too.
Of course it
I
is. Yeah. Yeah.
chefs are amazing. I think that's one of the hardest art forms to have, because everybody's a critic, especially with their food. Nobody plays about their food.
Well, the other thing is, if you're Michelangelo, you can make a statue and you can have a few
Mhm.
days off. But if you're that guy in The Bear, that show,
Yeah,
you've got
I
to
do.
do
Yeah,
you do dinner, then you're doing it the next night and the next night and the
yeah.
next night. It is like theater. It's a performance every night, really.
Hmm. Except the show don't run out until the business closes or you quit.
Well, exactly. It's even more
Yeah,
grueling, isn't it? At least in the theater, 6 months and I'm out of here or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You mentioned kind of like role models and like being amused with people. You come across as both amused and amazed in your stories. Has curiosity kind of been your compass?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, I think there's a kind of delightful moment sometimes if you're lucky, when you get this sense of a light bulb going off and you think material.
Hmm.
My friends joke with me because, I'd sometimes go on holiday with some of my mates. We went to Sicily. We went to
Ooh,
Sicily, and I was a bit too obsessed with the mafia.
nice,
And I made us all go to Corleone, which is the village where
classic.
the name comes from.
Yeah,
And
Michael
we had
Corleone.
exactly great films, and we had a cutthroat
Exactly.
shave in the barbers there. You know, probably
A what?
thousands of people. So
A
we went
cut.
to the barbers in
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Corleone, and we had those cutthroat
Um,
razors. We've got to shave with those, and
oh,
I
like
would
Sweeney
talk
Todd.
about. I beg your pardon.
Like Sweeney Todd. Like
Exactly like
oh,
Sweeney Todd. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, uh, yeah. So and I would talk to them about material or M. But for instance, recently I was lucky enough to go to the south of France to do a story about Paul Cézanne, the great French artist who came from there.
Hmm.
The city where he grew up didn't really recognize him when he was alive because
Hmm.
his art really pushed boundaries. He took great liberties with perspective, even the laws of physics, with his still lives. He painted
Hmm.
fruit and things, and he famously said, "With an apple, I will astonish Paris." Anyway, so the place he grew up, Aix-en-Provence, a beautiful city in the south of France, they're finally making good on ignoring him for years by having a big exhibition, and they've opened up his house where he used to live. But I picked up the local paper, and there was an interesting little story buried in the paper about how some company in France had developed roadside cool boxes for wine. Okay,
Mm.
now
Hmm.
you've been to France, right? The French love their food and drink and take it very seriously. And
Yeah.
like, in the south of France where we were, 2 hours for lunch minimum, forget about it. And the idea that the French would tolerate a kind of vending machine, like you get a can of Coke, or you get a packet of Cheezos or something from a vending
Yeah.
machine. So I, as soon as I saw that, I knew that would be a great story to run in the UK, because we all have our kind of preconceptions about the French, but I think it's largely, and about the Brits, of course, but I think it's largely true, that they love their wine and their fine living, and on the whole, they don't like fast food. If you go to Paris, there
Hmm.
aren't too many fast food outlets. So I wrote that story up for the Sunday Times, a big newspaper here, and it did very well. So curiosity, just looking and seeing things. That's not really an art story, although I would say it is a culture story. It's about how
Hmm.
people live. Um,
Yeah.
and any of your students who are thinking of getting into journalism, uh, I think looking around, keeping an open mind, and just thinking, now what could I do with that? I was really surprised nobody had picked this story up. But once I ran it in the
Yeah.
Sunday Times, lots of other newspapers followed suit.
Hmm.
So I hope that's an
Okay.
example of that.
No, that's a perfect example. Being curious and traveling the world. But what would you say that for students who maybe aren't as privileged as you and I to see the world,
Yeah.
where do they begin with finding a story worth telling? Is it kind of just tapping into their curiosity, or just I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably a good idea to start with something that interests you, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Yeah.
there are great stories really on your doorstep if you look for them. I mean, you're not going to
Hmm.
snag one every day, maybe, but what
Hmm.
interests you? Maybe if you're interested in the arts, you might go and get an interview with somebody and sell it to an outlet, maybe an online source, or maybe a magazine, maybe Rolling Stone, who knows? Um,
Yeah.
and I think you have to show initiative. You have to go for the story. It won't necessarily come to you. So you might see
Hmm.
something, you might have to make a few phone calls. Uh, People might brush you off, but then you have to sort of think laterally. Um,
Hmm.
we were always doing this on the news program I worked on, because we had to produce stories on the day. For TV, you have to find things to film, right? Sequences to
Hmm.
film, and also people to interview. And of course, you'd like to interview Trump, or you'd like to interview the Pope, but you're not going to get them. So you have to have workarounds. So
Hmm.
I think also keep an open mind. You might think a story is one thing, but when you dig a little deeper, it might lead off into a different idea. And
Okay.
one other thing I'd say is a phrase we use here, I don't know if you do: horses for courses. So you may have a story that your local paper or radio station or whatever, your favorite online outlet, isn't interested in, but somebody else will be. Um, So, yeah, I mean, you're right. We have been privileged. It's particularly privileging if you're able to travel somewhere on expenses. Uh,
Hmm.
that's that's dying out. Um,
Yeah.
but there are great stories near you, and they don't have to be sort of punchy news stories. They can be great features. You could.
Hmm.
I'm sure. I'm sure. You've talked about food. I'm sure some of your students enjoy food, making it, trying out new places. They're not all. They don't all have to be expensive. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of particularly online outlets are really hungry for copy, for material. And
Hmm.
okay, you might give some of your stories to one of these places. They might not pay much, they might not pay anything, but then you've got a body of work that you can show to people, you know.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
let's say that one of your students wants a job, I don't know, on a TV station or a newspaper, um, or a hot website. Uh, it's one thing to turn up and say, I'm really interested, I'm enthusiastic, I love words. That's great. But if you say, and here are the things I've done off my own bat, I got myself a column here writing about food, or, I did an overnight bus trip, or whatever it is, there'll be lots of sitters and journalists down there covering those disturbances. And I'm not advocating that your students march in there because it's quite dangerous,
Hmm.
but there will be people who will get very interesting angles on that story. That the
Hmm.
newspapers, the TV might miss.
Yeah. Okay. Well, circling back to the idea of curiosity, has your curiosity ever kind of led you to fail? And if so, what did you learn in that experience?
I think you fail all the time, don't you? You fail all
Yeah,
the time. If you're not
exactly.
failing, then you're not really trying hard enough. And it's absolutely true. It's often no consolation at the time, but failure is really the best teacher. It does,
Hmm.
you think, I'm not going to do that again. I mean, one of my first jobs was on a local newspaper, and I was just covering um, a bridge, a little wooden bridge that some Girl Guides had raised money for. Uh,
Hmm. A
I
bridge.
don't
What
know.
is
Do you
that?
have do you have Girl Guides over there?
What's a girl guide? Like
A
a
Girl Guide. Well, you know what a Boy Scout is.
oh yeah, like a Girl Scout.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have Girl
yeah,
Scouts.
Girl
Hmm.
Scouts. Sorry, they're called Girl Guides. Anyway,
Okay.
it was a local paper. It was a tiny little story. It's a picture story of one of these girls and one of her leaders, and they were on this bridge and they raised some money for it. And I think they raised £800. And in my copy, I put £8,000. Not a big deal, but it was enough to get, the editor. I was a trainee, and the editor had a few words with me. And ever since then, I've tried to check my figures a bit more carefully. I'm a words man, not a numbers man, but you realize you
Exactly.
have to. But yeah, I've interviewed some big stars and had them walk out on me because I've
Hmm.
asked questions that they didn't like. Um, there's a
I've seen
film
those. Yeah.
director that you might like this. Do you know the movies of Ken Loach? Have you heard of Ken Loach?
I'm just now getting into understanding my director names. Like I used to be a
Yeah,
big, okay, I know the actors, I know the story, but I forget the directors all the time. What did Ken
yeah.
Loach do?
Well, Ken Loach has been making films for years, and he makes kind of socialist realist films or social realist films. So if you look at his work, it'll tell you a lot about, poverty in England, hard times. He's a very political director, and one
Hmm.
year he won big at Cannes, the film festival, He made a movie
Hmm.
about the early days of the IRA, which was an organization in Ireland who didn't want the British to be there, essentially. So he made this film, and it did very well. And we did an interview. We went to quite a lot of trouble. We found a film studio. We lit it nicely. So I did this perfectly nice interview with Ken, all about his movies and poverty in the UK and the origins of the IRA. And so we had all that in the can. And then I thought, shall I try this question? And I said to him, Ken, don't you ever feel like going, F it, let's have a car chase? Right? I didn't actually use a cuss word because I thought, wouldn't it be funny? Because he has this great body of work, and I thought, wouldn't it be a good story if the producers of Mission Impossible had rung him by mistake, to make episode 8 with Tom Cruise, and he
Yeah.
just he looked at me in this disgusted way, and he said, Stephen, Stephen, I think your viewers deserve better questions than that. And he was probably right, and it went downhill from there. But I mean,
Okay.
I think Ken is a brilliant man and has left a much finer body of work than I could aspire to, but maybe not known for his sense of humor always. So it
That's
can
actually
get you into
hilarious.
trouble. It can get you into trouble. But
Yeah.
I think one thing I would say, Kennedy, about the arts is that reporters should approach it like they would any other subject, like politics, economics. Um, Despite the fact that I might privately be a fanboy about a certain writer or musician, I try to keep it real, and if there is a tough question begging to be asked, then you have to ask it. And
Hmm.
you're not really there to become anybody's friend, you know.
Hmm.
Um, it's sometimes,
Gotta get the scoop.
you've got to try and think, what would the person watching at home want me to ask? You know,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
um, you can't
Or the
always do
people.
that. Yeah, exactly. You're
Yeah.
there. As you say, it's a privileged position, but the other
Hmm.
side to it is you're hopefully doing something on behalf of whoever's watching or
Hmm.
listening.
Yeah. 100%. I like that.
Yeah.
Um, so in this world of kind of endless entertainment, to say the least, are there any books, shows, films, or memes that have kind of stuck with you lately that have been burning in your mind?
Well, one thing I did look at recently is this book. I don't know if you can see this. This is
Other
called
thoughts.
Art is Life.
Okay.
Um, it's a newish book by a guy called Jerry Saltz,
Hmm.
who is the art critic of New York Magazine, um, and has been on that beat for a long time. And I've mentioned it because I just wanted to, if I may, quote you a bit about it,
Hmm.
because if
Yeah,
I
please
I
do.
may not have enthused your audience with my take on culture, but if you hear
Hmm.
what Jerry has to say, perhaps it will convince people that it is
Yeah,
worth pursuing. So he says,
let's hear it.
reference. I won't read too much, but referencing new technology, he says art is the greatest operating system our species has ever invented, a means of exploring consciousness, seen and unseen worlds. Art allows us to ask big questions, to think in languages beyond words. It makes us reckon with uncomfortable things, compels us to look for difference, to glean the pressures of necessity, and to notice the monumental in details, how a girl's pearl earring can become the center of the world, or how the image of a famous face rendered in day-glow silkscreen might become an avatar of the damned. Art can be a talisman or comfort, used to heal or to make people kill. Art is bigger than mere subject matter. It's as big as life. So, and I think that's true of culture generally. You know, um,
Yeah.
good culture tells us something about who we are and how we live. So I've enjoyed his book. They've just done a rehang at the famous National Gallery in Leicester Square in London, which compares
Mm-hmm.
to the Louvre or the Met. Um,
Okay.
and that's been quite interesting and controversial because it used to be you walk through and it was all chronological, but now they've divided it up into sort of subject matter. So they're doing a bit on, the role of women in art, and they're doing another room is all about money and class and so on. So that's quite an
Mm-hmm.
interesting rehang of some, great paintings that are in the National's collection. So
Okay.
there's a couple of things, but yeah, Jerry Saltz. I started reading him on Twitter. He posts on
Twitter.
Twitter, and he's very
Okay,
good.
so
And
he's pretty contemporary.
yeah,
He's
he
brand
is.
new. Okay.
I think he's knocking on a bit, but he's very interested in Instagram. He writes a lot
Mm-hmm.
about art on Instagram and what a revelation that's been to him, and what a brilliant
Right.
way it is for relatively unknown artists to emerge and get a following. You don't have to wait
Mm-hmm.
for Jeff Bezos to buy your stuff. You can
Mm-hmm.
you can put it out there to the people.
Yeah. Are you on Instagram? Do you post a lot?
I'm not. No, isn't it terrible? I'm still on
It is
Twitter,
so
despite.
terrible. But yeah.
Well, I'm not on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I just thought, how much time do I want to spend scrolling and that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
But I
I think
appreciate.
I found a good method. It's like you got to post and ghost. That's what I call it.
Oh,
Like I'll post something and then I delete it off my phone, and then I have it on my iPad, but my iPad doesn't go everywhere with me. So just when I'm at home with my iPad, I'll check it out. But when I'm out in the streets, no Instagram at all. It's beautiful. It's wonderful that way. It's too
yeah. Oh,
addicting.
I might try that. Post and Ghost.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the
Post and
title of
ghost.
your next screenplay. That's quite grabby, isn't it?
Post and ghost. It could
Yeah,
be. It could be. It's a
it
good
could be.
idea. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Okay. We got just one more question for you. You ready?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
Do my best.
here it comes. All right. If you could give your 20-year-old self one sentence of career advice, what would that be?
Yeah. I mean, that's quite a hard one, really. Um, I, I've often felt that, as despite really enjoying journalism and never really wanting to do anything else, I've often felt I wasn't really cut out for it.
Mm-hmm.
I was in TV news, and once my boss said to me, "So, what would you like to do next? Would you like to present? You know, like be an
Mm-hmm.
anchor, not necessarily one of the big ones." And I'd never thought about it, and I was completely taken by surprise. And I just said to him, "No, you're okay," you know. And I look back sometimes and think, well, I might have been terrible. I think that's why I didn't do it. I just thought I'd be terrible. But who knows? I might have been okay. And it's a gateway to fame and riches. Uh, I sometimes thought that what I did would speak for itself. That my bosses would get what I did, and that would be enough. But actually, it's not so much about me, but for your students, if they want to get into this, um, you do need to get in the boss's office a bit and twist his or her arm and make sure that you're valued and noticed and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
kind of wish I'd been a bit more confident, really. A
Mm-hmm.
bit late now. But on the other hand, I think I began this answer by saying I wasn't sure I was cut out for journalism, and I think doubt is a really good but underrated quality in writers and
Mm-hmm.
journalists and anyone creative. Doubt. It sounds counterintuitive, but to be constantly or often just checking in with yourself, is this right? If you're doing a news story, you shouldn't go to the story with your mind made up about what it is. You should be open to what you find there. And it's the same with
Mm-hmm.
your writing. You think, I've written a nice piece here. Well, have another look at it in the morning. Does it stand up? Are the things that you thought were quite funny, do they land, or do they fall flat? And there's a great phrase used in editing, murder your darlings. I don't know if you've heard that. So the bits of
Kill
your
your babies.
the bits of your copy that you're most attached to, the purple prose, or the joke that you think, or I think I've written, sometimes you have to put a line through it and it's better for it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say to myself, if I was talking to my 20-year-old self, the doubt is good, but maybe a bit more confidence
Mm-hmm.
would help.
Okay.
So
So
there
stay
we are.
confident. Stay confident
Yeah.
out there, guys.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
if you can fake confidence, you've got it nailed.
Yeah. Fake it till you make it, or fake it till you got it. Fake it till you got that
Whatever
confidence.
works. Whatever works.
Whatever
Yeah.
gets you there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Stephen.
Well,
And
thank you,
for our
Kennedy.
listeners out there, yeah, of course. I was going to say, for our listeners out there, don't forget to use code 20thread for 20% off your first order with EssayPro. So yeah, that was my spiel. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.